So good evening and welcome everybody. After a little bit of a break, I appreciate your coming out, although this is a stunning night. I wanted to, in terms of a public service announcement, I hope you're getting the emails, and I sent Jeremy the link for the podcast, and he said he was going to be putting that podcast onto the shul website. So if you want to access the shiur, if you can't make it, or if you're looking for chazara, which would be nice, then you'll be able to do that soon. As is our practice and our custom, we dedicate the learning that we do in the shiur to the chatufim, to the captives that are still being held in Gaza dungeons. May they be released soon. To the cholim and the pitzuim who are recovering, and to the safety of our chayalim, and also for a complete victory over what is modern day Amalek. Okay, so anybody remember what we're learning? It's been 2 weeks. I had to go back to my notes. Apparently it's the Chovot HaLevavot. When we learn a text like this, right, it is common as we go through it to lose the forest for the trees. And every now and then we need to pull back and not get caught up in the specifics, but really to say, what are we looking to accomplish by learning this text? And it's really nothing less than to come up with activities and approaches that we can employ in our lives in a very practical way to build our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu and to get closer to Him. And the first gate, really the first 2 gates, are designed for us to get a sense of who the Kadosh Baruch Hu is, so to speak, right? We want to get a sense that we can begin to integrate into our knowledge base and into our emotions His majesty, His grandeur, His awesomeness, His power, His intelligence, right? And the list can go on and on and on and on. Now, in the first gate, we tried to ascertain these things in the Sha'ar HaYichud. And essentially, we tried to see if we could conceptualize God, if you will, in His element. And the short answer is we couldn't. Right? It was just beyond our ken to really understand what God is or who God is within His own context. Now, I know the word context has taken on a terrible meaning now, but using the old version of context. And the only thing we could learn about Him is that He is one. We weren't sure what that was. He is eternal, which is a concept we really can't fathom. And He is infinite, which is another concept that we can't fathom. So Ibn Pekuda said that we need to start not within God's context, but within our context. And because we are limited creatures, we have to understand it within a limited environment, and that is our world. So, and the goal of Ibn Pekuda is the more that we can appreciate God's grandeur, the more we will want to be close to Him. Because if we don't do this out of our own volition, if we don't feel this urge to get close to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's not going to happen. Right? All of this starts within us, within our emotions. And we started last week this discussion of seeing God in the world around us, and it is called the Sha'ar HaBechina. Sha'ar HaBechina is the gate of discernment, trying to understand and discern the world. And he laid out 6 things that he wanted to cover, and we covered the first 2 last time, right? He wanted to explain what it was and give us a definition. He wanted to talk about whether it was in and of itself a mitzvah or a way to get to a mitzvah. And we had said that it is in and of itself a mitzvah, that we are required to go through these exercises. And starting tonight, we're going to ask the question, okay, fine, if it's a mitzvah, how do we do it? Right? It's difficult and it takes some practice, but I think with some discussion and going over the what's being presented, we'll have an approach. The other is that what are we supposed to be looking for? Right? There are lots of things in the world. Are we supposed to be like me in a parking lot looking for my car with my remote, waiting for something to beep? I mean, is that the approach that the United States Supreme Court in the 1960s, when they used to look at pornography, pornographic material to see if it should be mutter or asr, they would say, I know it when I see it, right? So is this supposed to be when we go out? I'll know it when I see it, right? I'll know Kadosh Baruch Hu when I see him. And the other thing is, are there priorities? Are there things we should be looking at first or second or third, or is it all just one thing? And the last thing that we're probably not going to get to today is how come we don't do it? What are the practical things in our lives that prevent us from really moving forward in terms of seeing God in our day-to-day? And that might be the most important piece of this gate, because if we can overcome what's stopping us, or at least if we can recognize it, then chances are we're going to start doing some of the other things. Okay.
Sha'ar HaBechina.
Bechina. Sha'ar HaBechina. Right? We had talked about that the first bracha in the morning is Hanoten lesechvi vina lahavchin ben yom uven laila. Now, bechina is a choice, but here it means being able to tell the difference between two things. So, to give us a definition, I want to call on Rav Avigdor Miller, who I introduced last time from Alav HaShalom from Lakewood, and he says bechina is the study of nature, a study of the world around us, that we undertake in order to recognize the wisdom of Hashem and the kindliness of Hashem. And we brought several proofs that indeed it was a mitzvah. So this week, we say, how do we do it? Right? What is it that we should put in our sack? And I want to call on Rav Mueller again, because he is very succinct in terms of presenting how we should approach it. He says, and this is in source 1, the best source of bechina is your own two eyes, your own common sense. The world is full of wisdom. Use your eyes and you'll be able to discover the Kadosh Baruch Hu like Avraham Avinu did. He didn't go to the library. Abraham looked at the world and he recognized the Kadosh Baruch Hu by the means of his eyes and his common sense. He kir et boro. He recognized his creator without any libraries, and that made him great. And everybody can do the same. So now you're all sitting there saying, okay, so why are we here? Right? If all I need to do is go out, why do I need to sit in the shiur and learn about it from a book? And the short answer is that while the work on how and doing it is out there, knowing what to look for and how to look for it starts here. So I know that you're all ready to get up and start looking. We'll get to it. So how should we do it? So the first thing that Ibn Pekuda tells us is that when we look at nature and we look at the world around us, we have to spend time going in depth and breadth of the natural world. So many of the Meforshim on Chovot HaLevavot bring the example of a simple example of a tree. A tree is an amazing thing that mostly we ignore. First of all, it lasts, could be 1,000 years, and sometimes more. One of the oldest trees in the Tanya, in Israel, is in Netanya. It's a sycamore tree. It is behind the cultural center. And the first reports of it were sometime in the century, 1400, sorry, the 13th century, that wayfarers noticed it. They're amazing, right? And if you think about the root system and you think about how it draws nutrients, and if it's a fruit tree, it produces fruit that produces other trees. And not only that, you have to look at the context, right? Trees don't just live in a vacuum. Trees provide, they provide shelter. Trees provide oxygen. Trees provide, they provide homes for different animals, for birds, for insects, and food for everybody. And it's amazing that it's all put together by the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We have to look at a tree and just be amazed at what it is. And we spend very little time doing that. Right? So when we encounter these things, you have to kind of force yourself to see what's in front of you. And when you think about the fruit and you think about colors of the different fruit, if you look at source 2, Rav Miller says this. He says, when you eat an orange, so you're expected to look at the orange and say, look at this. Why is that the outside of the peel is so beautifully colored while the underside of the peel has no color? Why doesn't it happen that some oranges by accident should be beautifully golden colored on the inside of the peel and on the outside it should be plain without any color? It never happens. Always the beautiful color is on the outside. There's an idea that part of the reason for color is a chesed that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gives to us so we can appreciate the world. For everybody who every day takes photographs of the sunset, and the sun sets every day, right? But it presents such beautiful color, and it's there for us to enjoy. It says, why is it that a watermelon is a beautiful deep green on the outside? On the underside, it has no color. Why is it that the nut, the filbert, is a beautiful mahogany polish on the outside, and inside the filbert is rough and uncolored? So we see the purpose is in order to attract people. The color makes it more interesting in eating them. It advertises that it's ripe. You see a wonderful thing here in the hands of Hashem, the Chachmat Hashem, the wisdom of Hashem, and the Chesed of Hashem, the kindliness of Hashem. It is more of a pleasure to eat an orange that's brightly colored than an orange that has no color at all. Suppose all the oranges look like a potato, or all the apples look like potatoes. You might not want to eat them, so the Kadosh Baruch Hu made fruit beautifully colored so that they should attract your attention and so that you should enjoy them more. And then he brings the potato. He says HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't color the potatoes because the potatoes were beautifully colored. You might eat them raw and become sick. So therefore, potatoes are a bland, plain color. So you're patient. So you're patient and you have time to cook them. But apples have a beautiful color, which means eat me immediately. I'm ready to be enjoyed. You get the idea. Okay? So he calls this level investigating things that are obvious, investigating things that are in front of our eyes. Now, there was a question that was raised here a few weeks ago on couldn't somebody who doesn't have any relationship to God appreciate nature, right? Why does this immediately bring you into a relationship with God? And the Chovot HaLevavot says, of course, somebody who is an atheist, has no relationship to God, can appreciate nature. But he would say, but they're missing the point. They're missing the ultimate beauty and awesomeness of the nature. And he says that these are unthinking people, that they only go so far in terms of seeing the world around them. So he also says something that's a little bit strange. He says, when you're appreciating nature, you have to not only appreciate the physical nature of everything, he said, but everything in creation has a spiritual component to it. It's hard to understand what the spiritual component of a tree is, right? I mean, unless you're a druid or I don't know. So he says, it is proper that you should know but the whole world is synthesized of physical and spiritual, so intimately mixed and fused that each of them sustains the other, the body and the soul in living creatures. So this is a little less intuitive and harder to look for and discern. And really, I had trouble trying to come up with their examples and really figure out what it is he's talking about. He says that there are discoveries about Hashem that can be made in things in the world that are counterintuitive. So we've been talking about seeing the Kadosh Baruch Hu in nature and in the physical world, like looking at the ecosystem and the interdependency between creatures and plants. But he says this. He said the second kind, this is source 4, the second kind consists of marks of wisdoms whose benefit and necessary is hidden from most people and known only to the intelligent person who comprehends that they are right. And the example he gives is such as death. The fate that overtakes all flesh and which is necessary for the welfare of the world, as our sages expounded the verse, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Behold, it was very good. This refers to death. So too the wise king said, wise king that Shlomo HaMelech, and this is in Kohelet, wherefore I praise the dead which are already dead more than the living which are yet alive. So he's saying we should find God's presence and grandeur and wisdom in death and taxes and famine, which is a little bit shocking when you think about it, right? And he says that this too shows his majesty. So he's cited a strange medrash, which asks the question of when in creation the Torah tells us, Vayar Elokim v'hinei tov ma'od, everything was very good. He said, what is tov ma'od? Everything was tov, and then we got to it, and he said everything was tov ma'od. So it's B'Torato shel Rebbe Meir, this is source 5. In the Torah, in the annals of Rebbe Meir, Matzanu katuv v'hinei tov ma'od. Right? They found that it was written in the Torah, Hinei Tov, no, Hinei Tov, here is Tov, it means mot, means death. So it's a very strange comment to say that when you talk about something that's very good, you're talking about death. Am I the only one who finds that like really strange? Okay. So you can imagine that there's lots and lots and lots of commentary trying to figure out what this means. But I think that if we think about it, it expresses this duality between the physical and the spiritual. So we can look at death in two ways. One, in terms of the physical world, and the overall point is that we should see in everything in the physical world. Physically, death is what keeps the planet going, right? When things die, they decompose and they regenerate. When we think about death, we think about obviously human tragedy. But if you think about everything, you can see that without it, you wouldn't have this kind of ongoing regeneration. Now, Paulette and I are avid hikers. And when you go hiking in the woods, typically what you will see is in fallen trees, you will see 4 or 5 other trees growing out from the trees themselves. Right? And it demonstrates the wisdom that even in death and decomposition, there is the wisdom that Kadosh Baruch Hu put into the world. So the question becomes then, what is this idea in terms of spiritually? And as you can imagine, when the rabbis commented on this particular medrash, they spent no time talking about the physical aspect, and all of the time focusing on the spiritual components. And so I want to bring to you a couple ideas in terms of how we can see the purpose and the benefit of death into focus. So one is the Radal, which is Rabbi David Luria, who was a 18th century, end of the 18th century, middle of 19th century Rav, that he said that when the Torah said creation was good, it was referring to this world. And when it said it was very good, it was referring to the next world. So the fact that we have, according to the Radal, that what death allows us to do is it allows us a gateway to Olam Haba, right? And since our lives are limited, it gives us the ability to look to the next world and to work on ourselves in this world. And there's a famous Mishnah in Masechet Avot. I think every Mishnah in Masechet Avot is famous, and you can put that in front of anyone you choose. It says, Yafeh sha'ar chad shel korach ruach b'olam haba. It is better 1 hour of repose, if you will, in the next world, mikol chayei olam hazeh. And what gives us access to that is this idea that this is a temporary place before we move on. But I don't think that's the point that Ibn Pekuda really wants us to take away. Because in the end, he brings an enigmatic pasuk from Kohelet to also prove his point. And it says, V'shabeach ani, and I praised et hametim, shekvar metu, those who have passed on, min hachayim, more than those who are alive, asher he machayim oden. I praise people who are died because they're dead over people who are alive because they're alive. Anybody want to? I know it's not a short, I know it's not a course on Kohelet, which maybe we'll do one day, but let's assume that Kohelet, let's assume that Kohelet is not talking about dead people per se, but people who see wisdom in death. And in that case, then the wisdom is not in death itself, but it's in thinking about death, right? And not in a morbid sense, but in a constructive growth sense. So let me bring you what Rabbeinu Yonah has to say. He wrote a sefer called Sha'ar Tshuva. This book is divided into Sha'arim, chapters. His book is divided into Sha'arim as well, all about Tshuva, and he covers a lot of very interesting ideas. So on this medrash, he said, our rabbis made their memory be blessed, said, and God saw all that he had made, and he found it very good. This very good is death, right? So he's quoting the medrash we just did. For even death is good, as that it humbles spirits, causes the heart to fear God, and acts against one coming to regard this world as uppermost. So it has a spiritual component that it serves us to understand and appreciate this world and appreciate the world that's coming. But there are people who allow no time for their souls, who do not set aside time for the understanding of their ends, because their preoccupation with acquisitions of this world. So if you don't take the time to kind of understand and to think about, right, then you're not going to be able to glean the wisdom that's necessary. That is not their gain, their money plucked away from them in their going forward, meaning Tachritim have no pockets. For behold, they have no benefit from it when they die, yet it deprives them of much good. Meaning in the end, you can't take it with you. And not only doesn't help you in the end, but it harms you in this life. For it caused them to die without wisdom, without having learned to understand their end, to perfect their souls, and to prepare provisions for their journey. As it is written, for we were wise, they would think upon this, gain insight into their future from Devarim. And we see the spirituality of things, right? In addition to death, if you want to go back to our tree, by studying both their immediate and far-reaching causes and effects, their raison d'etre, their reason for being, and their special transcendent quality about each thing that alludes to God's presence within it. So if we think about everything in the world, and we think about why God put it there, right, it elevates it. We're now not looking at a rock, we're looking at a rock that's there because the Kadosh Baruch Hu put the rock there. And it allows us to kind of live in a place that is not just physical, but also spiritual. There's another example that I came across that's also kind of counterintuitive. And it's based on the bracha that we say every day. We say the bracha Asher Yatzar, right? The prayer that we say after we've gone to the restroom. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher yatzar et haodam b'chachma v'aravo nekavim chaluim galui v'yadur lifnei kisei kvodecha she'im yifatech echad mihem o yisatem echad mihem I yashar litkayem la'amod lefanecha afilu shar achat. Right? Basically, it says you've created everything that works, and if anything shuts down, it doesn't work. Right? I mean, that's basic. And then it has a really bizarre ending. It says, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, God, Rofei Kol Basar, who heals all flesh, Umafli Lasot, and performs wonders. Do you ever wonder what wonders are we talking about? And there are two problems with how this ends. One, that doesn't seem to make any sense. But the other thing is we don't tend to write brachot with two ideas in it. We usually write it with one idea. There are exceptions. On Yom Tov, we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. And we say that because we cause the times. So it's not just blessing the times, it's blessing us who creates and sets the times, but mostly it's just one thing. We can only keep one idea in our heads. But here you seem to have two ideas, and the two ideas don't seem to go together like we just did with the brachot about that we say on Yom Tov. So if I were going to end this bracha, right, which I'm not, I would end it with Baruch Atah Hashem Rofei Kol Basar, period. But according to the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, he says, Umafli Lasot, this wonder that he does, refers to that the Kadosh Baruch Hu has created a body which is 100% physical and has placed within it a soul, a neshama, which is 100% spiritual. And not only that, but they're interdependent. So the soul supports the body, and the body protects the soul. And I had to look this up, and I'm not sure, I'm just going to say it, I'm not sure what it means, but when antimatter hits matter, both, I don't know what antimatter is, when they collide, they both get destroyed. Right? So here you have two different independent things, and not only do they not to destroy each other, but not only do they coexist, but they're symbiotic. And when you see that the body is working, Rofei Kol Basar, because the body is working, Umafli Lasot, it allows the soul to flourish. So when we say that bracha, we should not only be thinking about what the Kadosh Baruch Hu has done for the body and for all of us, but what that does in turn do for the soul, which is our connection to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And another way to think about it is on a subatomic level. Nothing exists. Everything's space. Everything's empty space. The only reason we think this is solid is because the electrons spin at such a rapid rate that it appears to us to be solid. if those electrons stopped spinning, the cable would disappear. And the electrons continue to spin because Kadosh Baruch Hu wants it to continue to spin. So every object in the world exists and is sustained by the Kadosh Baruch Hu, be it a rock, a tree, ourselves, a table. I mean, when you used to buy a computer, I don't know if they still do, it's been so long, there was a sign that said Intel inside, right? So when you see everything, we could put a little thing, Kadosh Baruch Hu, inside. So not only should we look at the spiritual dimensions in terms of the uses and purposes, but the fact it's only here because the Kadosh Baruch Hu put it here and keeps it there. There's a little, this is a little bit of an aside, but my cousin Seymour, who was Nifter this year, he was always unhappy with the idea that God lived in the world. And the reason he was always unhappy is because the world is subject to rules and nature. And to say that God lives in the world, that means he's subject to nature and rules. And that's just not true. And then he started learning subatomic physics. And apparently in the subatomic physical world, there are no rules, right? You have, boson, Higgs, and you have the God particle. You have all these things that's happening underneath all of this, where there are no rules and no predictability. And he said, that must be where the Kadosh Baruch Hu lives in the world. So it's not just the electrons. The other thing that he said that we need to keep in mind is that as we do this exploration, it not only elevates everything around us, but it elevates us too. Right? We become holier, we become more spiritual. We see how we fit in not only the physical world, but the spiritual world as again. The other thing that this does, and that Ibn Kruda says, is that it's important to see behind the curtain and try to understand the spirituality and the divinity and everything. It begins to give us, like we said, insight into why we are here and what our purpose is. And we see that the world offers us, our lives offers us a spectrum where if on this side is 100% negation of physicality, pure spirituality, where nobody can live, and this side is 100% physicality with no spirituality, where you really shouldn't live, as you explore this and you think about it, we are naturally more drawn to go down the spectrum, to become more emphasis on the spiritual, to become closer to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and less emphasis on the physical. Now, everybody's at a different point on the spectrum. Everybody travels at a different rate. Nobody belongs here. Kadosh Baruch Hu belongs here. And the question is, you have to begin to look at yourself, and we're going to get into this as we go, and say, where is it going? Where do I draw the line? Where am I comfortable? Where is my spiritual, physical balance going to be? And you might see, or what he hopes they'll see, is that as we downplay kind of things that we have and maybe don't need, I don't know if that applies to everybody, applies certainly to me, maybe things are less important. So being a divine scavenger, right? Looking for the divine in everything. What should we be looking for? Right? What should be on our checklist? In other words, I brought a few examples on nature. I talked about the table, and I talked about the trees, right? And I could easily give you 1,000 more, and you probably could give me 1,000 more on top of that. But what should we be looking for? right? What are the categories of places that we should shop, if you will, to try and find the Kadosh Baruch Hu? So I want to remind everybody what Rabbi Miller said to us earlier. And that is that we need to actually set aside time to do this. And it's going to feel very awkward in the beginning. But if we're going to grow, we need not all day, every day. Maybe when you're walking on the beach. Maybe if you're walking in the woods, right? And to really make an effort when you say the brachot, what is it you're really supposed to be saying other than I'm hungry? Right? What is it that we're supposed to appreciate in everything that we have? Because the reality is we can't see him if we don't look. I know that sounds obvious, but a lot of times we think we're going to do it without looking. And so Ibn Bakuda gives us 7 categories. As you know, he's a great list maker on what we should pay attention to. And he calls these items signs of wisdom. And so the first one is the signs of wisdom inherent in the basic elements of the physical world. Although his understanding of the physical world is different than what we understand and is a little dated, I want to read it to you because it's really quaint. Right? It gives you an idea of how he sees the world, although we have covered most of this, but I really loved it. He says, one of these is the mark of wisdom apparent in the primary and fundamental elements of the universe. So what are the elements of the universe for Ibn Bakuda? Come on. Fire, water, earth, and air. Okay. The earth we observe is, and the fundamental elements of the universe. The earth we observe is at the center. Right? Earth is in the center of the universe. He's writing in the 1000s. Close to it and above it, it is water. Close to the water is the atmosphere, which is air. Above all is fire. And in a just and unchanging balance in nature, meaning all the elements work together. Every one of these elements maintains its proper position appointed for it, meaning the water doesn't put out the fire. The ocean bed with the waters imprisoned therein stays in its place and does not pass beyond the boundaries, despite the roaring of the waves and the raging of the winds. When I went over, I said, this is great. My science life would be a lot easier if we only had 4 elements and not whatever's in the periodic table I had to memorize. And the second thing he says, which is a little bit hard to think about at first, he says the signs of wisdom inherent in humanity, which is the apex of creation. Now, it's not physically in humans, but in humanity. And he says, in that sense, mankind is a microcosm of creation. Anybody want to take a stab in terms of what that means? You could have saved me a lot of time. So it says, the Avot the Rebbe Natan, which is a Perush on, among other things, Perkei Avot. He says, he takes this idea very literally, and he says anything in the universe that exists can be found physically and represented in individuals, right? These items are both spiritual and physical. It takes a while to try and think through how that applies to what it is Ibn Bakuda wants us to say. But let's take it at base value. I'm just going to read the English, and you'll have to take my word for it that the Hebrew. So it says, Rabbi Nehemiah would say, where do we learn that one person is considered as important as the entire work of creation? Because it says in the beginning of Breshit, Eula Toldot, right? These are the generations of mankind. And before it, it says these are the generations of heaven and earth. So they make a comparison and they said, well, just like everything is accounted for in heaven and earth, then all of those things must be accounted for in mankind. So they gave a power, meaning this is what we're talking about. And it says, to what can this be compared? It can be compared to someone who took a piece of wood and wanted to carve lots of figures into it. Let's skip down. So the Holy One, so too the Holy One, blessed be He. May the Holy Blessed One, may His name be great and blessed forever. In His wisdom and insight, created the whole world with the heaven and earths above and below. And He fashioned within the human being everything that He created in this world. He created forests in the world, and He created forests in human beings. That is their hair. He created evil beasts in this world. I think there's no doubt that we can see the evil beasts in human beings. Here they say it is the meion, it's the intestines. He created thorns in the world. He created thorns in human beings at their ears. He created scent in the world. This is their noses. It goes on and on. But it's also not just that. It says rivers in the world and rivers in human beings. That is, and we're about to take guess, tears. Okay, walls in the world and walls in human beings. That's people's lips. Doors in the world, doors in human beings. That's people's teeth. And it goes on and on and on and on and on, even down to animals. Horses in the world and horses in human beings. That is a person's thigh. Mountains and valleys in the world, mountains and valleys. So it's hard to figure out exactly what Ibn Battuta not only is telling us, but what he wants us to do with this. So if we call on the Khatam Sofer to help us out, so he has an idea that I think is worth. That sounds arrogant. I was going to say it's worth considering. Of course, he has an idea that's worth considering. Here's his idea. That we were created as a microcosm of the world to teach us that if we hurt one part of us, we hurt the whole. If we hit our hands with a hammer, it's not just a hand that gets hurt, but the entire world. Similarly, if we damage God's world, we don't just damage the little piece that we damage, but the entire piece. It's a very interesting medrash in Breshit Rabbah, where the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm giving you this world, and that's it. You're not going to get another one, so take care of it. If you go to Jewish ecology conferences, this is a medrash that's quoted all the time. But it fits here to talk about that we have to understand that we are all one, right? And we are a reflection of the world. There's another idea that is brought by the Ravid, and he says that when the Torah tells us that we are created in the image of God, it means that all of creation and all of its potential and all its potential for creation is embedded in us. Right? That we have the same ability, we have a similar ability, we have an analogous ability to create that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us. So we can see His ability to create and His ability to build based on what we can do. And looking at our potential, and I don't know that we've reached the potential for man, we can begin to appreciate and get an idea of the Kadosh Baruch Hu and what He has done for the world. And we can see God's greatness in our potential greatness. It's an interesting idea. I've been thinking about that idea a lot. And the signs of wisdom inherent in the form of us as humanity, right, is it's both physically, mentally, and so we'll go to the next one. So number 3. Okay, I'll talk faster. So number 3 has to do with physically looking at us and the wonder of us as a human being. This is easier, obviously, for me to understand. And the Chovot HaLevavot in source 12 says, the third cornerstone is the mark of wisdom apparent in the foundation of individual human beings. His physical structures, the facilities of his nefesh. Nefesh is the humanity part of us, as opposed to neshama, and the light of reason with which the Creator has distinguished him and has given him superiority over other living creatures, and that are other living creatures that are not rational. Man represents the large universe, being like it fundamentally in its original elements. So the fourth one is the signs of wisdom inherent in other species, from large and small. We talked about last week what we can learn from the different animals, the signs of wisdom in plant life. I wanted to get to the sixth one, because the sixth one is something we don't spend a lot of time thinking about that we should. And this is the signs of wisdom inherent in the various sciences and disciplines that God designed so that a person might earn a living, meet his needs, and benefit in other ways. So we have a tendency to ascribe nature to God and ascribe wisdom to us, right? Meaning, God created the mountains, we created music and science, and we marvel at scientific advances, and it makes us as a species because we are responsible for that. But the ability to create and the ability to discover is ability that's given to us from God. The Torah tells us, Vayomer in shamor tishma lekol Hashem, if you listen to God, Hashem Elokecha v'hayashar be'einav ta'aseh, and you do the right thing, v'azanta lemitzvotav, and you listen to his mitzvot, v'shmarta kol chukatav, kol hamachala asher samti b'mitzrayim lo asim alecha, whatever illnesses I visited you in. And then it says, Ani Hashem rofecha, I am your healer. Now, some people take that to mean we shouldn't go to doctors, right? That's Christian scientists. It says God is the healer, don't take medicine. We don't believe that. We believe that God is the healer, but he gave us the ability to heal. And not only gave us the ability, he gave us the responsibility to heal. And there's a story, right, that you hear about doctors that they come in from the operating room and they say, it's now in God's hands. And the truth is, it was in God's hands before they went into the operating room. And the one guiding God's hands and teaching how to do is that. So what does that mean? And this is something that we can and should do and don't do. As you walk around the Tanya and you see all this amazing construction that's going on, and you see all of this building and all of this wisdom in terms of how things get built, all of that behind it is God. It's God teaching us how to do it. Right? We can have skyscrapers because they invented the elevator. Without the elevator, then nobody's going to go up, 50 floors. Somebody had to invent that. Somebody had to have the idea. Where does inspiration? All of these things that when you hear music, right, we have composers. And if you ask composers, where did this come from? Or authors. I mean, you hear that in the arts, but it's true in the sciences too. Where do breakthroughs come? And it's joined together. They tell a wonderful story. Actually, again, my cousin Seymour told me this story about the Chofetz Chaim, that they brought to him and showed him a telephone. And they said, for the first time, and they said, Rebbe, it's a miracle. You can stand here in Rodden and you can talk to somebody in Warsaw. He says, that's not a miracle. He says, the miracle is I can stand here and talk and you can understand me. That's the miracle. But the truth is they're both miracles, and they're both from the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that we can see everywhere. And you can see it faster and faster and faster in our day because things keep changing so quickly, right? What is it? Every 5 years, knowledge doubles. We've created a way that we can learn more faster so that we can understand the world more faster. But that's not us, right? That's the chachma of the Kadosh Baruch Hu that he put into us. And I think it is not only humbling, but I think it's important enough for us to begin to see the world through that lens. Okay, last one. And the wisdom of the Torah and its laws, through which the person, we can serve the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he says that we can earn for ourselves a place in Olam Haba. Now, that's how he presents, that's how Ibn Pekuda presents it, but I think it's a bigger idea than that. Right? So it's not that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us a path for reward, which is in and of itself an amazing gift, right? I don't want to take anything away from it. But I think that it's bigger in two ways. One is he's given us the instruction manual on how to live a wonderful life. Now, when we talk about mitzvot, most of us talk about mitzvot ben adam lemakom. And we spend a lot of time on the etrog. And the etrog is very important. But I tried to get the number split, but I couldn't get anybody to agree. So let's say half. It's not about ben adam lemakom. It's ben adam lechavero, how we should treat each other. He not only is telling us how he wants to be treated and how he wants to relate to each other, but he wants us to how we relate to each other. So there's a mitzvah, v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you should love God, but there is also a mitzvah, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? That kind of relationship is not limited to how you should relate to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You should relate to everybody that way. And some people focus on bein adam lemakom, and some people focus on bein adam lechavero, right? But there's not half a Torah, right? We have to keep all of it. And it's amazing the wisdom that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is telling you, because you would think that he would only be concerned how we treat him. But he gives us this Torah so that we can live a full and complete life. You know, everybody's a critic. But it's also amazing that he's given us a user manual in terms of how to relate to him. And so we don't have to guess. Right? How do you want to live your life? How do you want me to relate to you? Here's the book. Here's the user manual. In most other religions, that is given to priests. That is given to ruling class. You go to them, and they tell you what they think their God wants you to do. That's not what's happening here. The Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I want a relationship with each of you, and not just you collectively. Here's the manual. Okay, so let's start here if we don't have any questions. And we'll talk about, are there priorities and why aren't we doing it?